You're listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis, the only podcast focused on the BioHealth Capital Region. Each episode, we'll talk to leaders in the industry to break down the biggest topics happening today in biohealth.
Hi, this is Rich Bendis, your host for BioTalk. And as you know, we try to find provocative and interesting companies and people within the BioHealth Capital Region or nationally, internationally, and we're lucky to have somebody from our southern part of the BioHealth Capital Region from Reston, Virginia. And actually, I met Gerard Eldering, who's the CEO of Perfusion Medical, at one of our BioHealth Capital Region forums several years ago. And we've been able to maintain a relationship. And we're going to talk about some of the experience he's had at that forum, as well as the growth of his company, Perfusion Medical. So I'd like to welcome Gerard Eldering, CEO of Perfusion Medical, and the winner of the most recent crab trap competition at the 2025 BioHealth Capital Region Forum, to BioTalk.
Thanks, Rich. It's great to have this time to speak with you today.
Basically, Gerard, I could introduce you, or we could have people go to your bio or LinkedIn profile, but I think the listeners would like to hear you give your background on how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, the interesting thing is here I'm running a drug development company, and I don't have the background or training in the drug space. I'm really more of an entrepreneur with a military background. After getting a physics undergrad, I went into the Air Force, flew helicopters for 7 years with the Air Force, including some medevac missions. My last assignment was out of Andrews Air Force Base, which brought us into this area. After the Air Force, I got my MBA at University of Maryland, College Park, excellent business school, and found myself getting into the tech transfer space. I spent about a decade at the MITRE Corporation, built up their tech transfer program. MITRE's a big nonprofit running FFRDCs in the area, very active company. And that was a great experience, but the entrepreneur bug was in me. It had been for a while, and eventually I decided I've just got to pull the trigger. So I left the MITRE Corporation, set up my own business, and started pulling technologies out of universities. And I've got a couple other portfolio companies that I've built through the years, but in 2020, this opportunity was presented to me that I built into Perfusion Medical by co-founding the company with Dr. Martin Mangino.
You know, it's interesting. There was another helicopter pilot that was recently in the news who just became the governor of New Jersey. I don't know if you knew that, Gerard, but maybe there's some aspirations you can go beyond perfusion in the future down in Virginia.
That's going to have to be a whole nother show, Rich.
Okay, probably too much longer than you and I would be interested in doing that. So you talk about taking technologies out of universities. Why don't you give us a little background on Perfusion Medical and actually how this evolved and how you became involved with it?
First, I would say that this whole concept of taking things out of the university is interesting. I recently had this conversation with another entrepreneur who was exploring that area. I told him when I first stepped into the entrepreneurial space, I had recognized that these universities have such a large volume of innovation, hundreds of millions of dollars going in some universities, creating new inventions, new intellectual property. And they have a mission and they commit themselves to trying to get those technologies commercialized. But the process is very inefficient. The faculty members don't naturally have the skill sets for that. So basically, kind of going back to the military terminology, I view universities as a target-rich environment for innovation. So that's why I stepped into that space and built a lot of relationships. I helped universities throughout the Mid-Atlantic and some other parts of the country build some successful startups. In late 2019, the tech transfer director down at Virginia Commonwealth University called me and said, look, I need you to come down and talk to this faculty member. He's had $12 million in funding from the Army, developed a drug candidate. They have a volume of animal data. The results are phenomenal, off the charts. But we just don't know what to do. He's not the type of faculty member who wants to start a company himself. So I went down there and I dove in deep and I looked at it and called up a lot of doctors and entrepreneurs and market experts and had them look at it. And in all seriousness, it was absolutely in the top 5 opportunities I had seen out of universities throughout 15 years of work in the space.
You know, it's interesting. You talk about working with universities, and you actually provided a role with VCU to where you actually In our terminology, we're sort of like an entrepreneur in residence working with the faculty and researchers at VCU, and actually got us involved with our EIR term to support VCU. Talk a little bit about, before we get a little more deeply into perfusion, talk about that EIR role and some of the things that you can do for the tech transfer offices, since researchers understand the science, but they don't understand a lot about the market or go-to-market strategies or things around how do you commercialize a technology.
I don't want to suggest I'm speaking very highly of myself, but when we talk to these tech transfer offices, they have a real shortage of individuals with significant entrepreneurial experience who also understand the university environment and the faculty and how to engage with those. That is a rare commodity. There's real opportunity and real value for folks like myself, and lots of other folks in the region, or, well, I should say a limited number of entrepreneurs in the region who have that skill set, and you've got some great folks that are supporting some of the government agencies through your organization. So that value is so greatly needed. There's a couple of ways people like myself can support these universities in this. Very often, it's just a phone call, and I get asked by VCU still and George Mason University to do calls or Zooms with faculty, once or twice a month, where they're contemplating the commercialization pathway, or maybe they're thinking about, maybe I want to build a startup company. So I just dive in with them on a call, talk about the mechanics of it, and also try to bring some reality. I have some lines that I use with them. For example, one of the things I'll tell them if they say, look, I want to start a company, I want to build this out, I'll tell them, look, that is a giant full-time job. Think of it this way. You can do two things successfully in your life out of these three. And that is have a successful academic career, run a successful startup company, and have a successful marital relationship. It's sort of joking, but to the line of, hey, the odds of you succeeding at all of those is not good, and the consequences can be quite severe. So part of that discussion is that coaching. Sometimes is bringing other resources in. If I know an entrepreneur is looking for an opportunity, we'll bring them in. That's great. Or direct them to early stage funding sources and things like that. And then, when folks like myself have the bandwidth and we're at that right space in time, then we step in like I did with Perfusion Medical and take that CEO role on.
Yeah, one of the things that's unusual about what happened to you is this call you got, hey, we've got this interesting technology. It's already raised 12 million, which is something that is not something that an early stage technology in the university has done in research grants. And they say, let's evaluate that. So you go in, you evaluate something that has had several years and millions of dollars invested in it, but not knowing what to do with the technology. So talk a little bit about the technology itself, what you saw in it that gave you the hope that it could be successfully commercialized. And did Perfusion Medical exist, or was the company created after you got there?
By the way, I did found the company with Dr. Mangino. We sat down and had a series of conversations, and he wanted to see it advanced. He's definitely not the entrepreneurial type or somebody who would do it himself. So Marty and I co-founded the company, which has a lot of merit to that. Speaking about the technology a little bit, so Marty had this about $12 million from MRDC, and this is grant funding into the university, right? So no investment into the company because the company didn't exist yet. Marty pursued this area of looking at an issue called no reflow. So Marty's got a background in both organ preservation spaces, but also ischemia, trauma. He was working with a lot of the trauma surgeons down at VCU and basically had this belief or this hypothesis at the beginning that when somebody lost a lot of blood, after some period of time, maybe 45 minutes to an hour, there was this problem with cells swelling up and compressing the capillaries. That issue, it's called no reflow. It exists. You could search it and you'll tend to find articles about it in the cardiac space. But Marty was saying, hey, I think this is a big issue in hemorrhagic shock, like something that's limiting the survival of these worst case bleeding victims. And the military really cared about that concept because they're trying to save the lives of soldiers on the battlefield. In fact, the resulting injury, which is called hemorrhagic shock, that's a shock state after you've lost a lot of blood, is the largest opportunity that the military has to save lives of soldiers. That is the one thing, if they could move the needle on, they're going to see the greatest improvement in survival of soldiers. So Marty had this hypothesis, persuaded the military to support him, and invested that money into his lab. He's got a fantastic lab down there at VCU, and started with these experiments. And I won't share the story here, but he's got a great story of spending about 2 years trying different candidates, different solutions. It was not an overnight, hey, just thought of this overnight, yeah, it works. It was a true exercise in a lot of failure, and finally really stumbled on the right solution. So an intravenous drug solution that pulls the water out of these cells and just reopens the capillary system. What I love to say to prospective investors when we're having these conversations, sometimes when I'm just trying to bring it down to basics, what I say is, look, think of it this way. Your whole blood is like food trucks on the highway after a storm, and they deliver the oxygen, and that's great. But you got to have the roads, the last miles, the roads out to the grocery stores and the homes open so the food trucks can get their food out to the folks that need it. And our drug reopens those last miles, the capillaries. And without it, your blood that's bringing the oxygen can't deliver it.
So what is the current method of treatment today that you're trying to improve upon?
One of the exciting things, at least from a business perspective, is there is no effective solution. There was an attempt a couple of decades ago to try to fix no reflow. It was not effective. The doctors really rely on the whole blood today, which is essential. And to clarify, we are not competing. Whole blood is delivering the oxygen. We don't do that. We open the roadways. We open the pathways for that, right? So they're very complementary. But today, the physicians and the first responders' big hope is that we can get the whole blood in the patient fast enough in that window that I mentioned, 45-minute or so window, to prevent this no reflow. After that, they don't really have a tool to work with today. There's things like vasopressors, which kind of crank up the blood pressure, but you're trying to force water through a constrained pipe, a constrained capillary.
One of the things I've heard you talk about is that this product is both organ and disease agnostic. Talk a little bit about that, as well as what do you think the scale of this opportunity is?
Great question, Rich. And I get very excited about that. That point started emerging when I was doing my due diligence before we even started the company. And one of the things that really persuaded me was I would share this paper with a vascular surgeon or critical care doctor. Marty's papers, they would look at the data and then we would have a follow-up call. And what happened multiple times is they would say, oh, this is really interesting. It's fascinating that the military wants this for hemorrhagic shock. And there's lots of civilian patients who suffer hemorrhagic shock. But they would say, oh, I had a cardiogenic shock case the other day. I've been treating a patient with cardiogenic shock. I wish I had this drug. I see how it would help in that situation. Or I had a mesenteric ischemic case or a limb ischemic case. So the doctors were organically identifying all these other applications. Rich, sometimes in the investor pitches, I'll hold up a vial of epinephrine and make an analogy to the epinephrine. Epinephrine, it's completely different function, non-competitive to what ours does. It's adrenaline, but it functions at such a base physiological level in the body, just creating very, very base functionality. And therefore, it's utilized in a lot of different situations. Epinephrine is called for in the ER. It's used by first responders. It's used in the surgical suite. It's used in the ICU. Our drug has a parallel there because this no reflow problem can crop up in any situation where there's restricted blood flow, lack of blood flow for a period of time. And that's occurring a lot in the surgical ward, the ICU, and the ER. That's one of the exciting things about this. We look at our list of 20 different possible indications that we could market the drug for eventually with the right FDA approvals and see ranges of numbers. In some cases, it might be 1 million patients a year in the biggest surgical uses. In other cases, it's 40,000 patients a year. But the sum of that pool is very large. That's tremendously exciting. I will say, as you know, we don't just go and get one drug approval and advertise it for 20 different indications. So that's a reality we have to deal with. And a big part of the business side of this is to say, what's the appropriate strategy? What are the first 2, say, indications to go after, and then open the door for the other uses for the drug?
Yeah, you mentioned the FDA and the regulatory process. Let's talk a little bit about where the stage of the technology is in both the regulatory process as well as in the commercialization life cycle, and what are the most critical milestones that you have to achieve continuing to move this forward.
For the listeners who aren't familiar with the medical process for a drug, there's a couple of key milestones. The first thing you do is what's called a pre-IND. So we met with the FDA, it was actually years ago, and presented it with our game plan. This is how we want to prove to you that, or demonstrate to you that the drug is safe enough to start testing it in humans. The end of that milestone, the end of executing that plan we presented to them, is filing what's called an IND. We're going to file that this winter. In late December, early January, we'll file the IND. Now, folks who are familiar with life science companies know that's a pretty key milestone. The next step after that is a series of clinical trials. The first one is a phase 1. In our case, that's just a safety. We provide this to a series of patients, monitor, make sure that they don't have any reactions. There's no negative effects from the drug that we didn't anticipate. Good news for us is we have the funding for that study from the Air Force. We'll execute that next year and move through that trial. The long game is additional trials, a phase 2, which is where you're really going into patients who have a disease that needs the drug, and that can occur in different diseases. And then a phase 3 normally is the next step after that. And after the phase 3, we submit the drug application. I will add to that, one of the challenging things in drug development is those series of clinical trials can take a lot of time. It can take many years till you get that drug application in. That is something that can turn off investors, understandably so. But there are modifications to the pathway, I'd say. In a case like Perfusion Medical, I don't think our company is going to have to work our way through phase 2, 3, and drug application by ourselves. I'm confident that we're going to have a partnership or other type of relationship with a big pharma company that has so much more resources. And we've got a tremendous team of experts today at Perfusion Medical, but they've got 10x that they bring to the table.
You talk about the length of time as well as the amount of money that's required, but a lot of startups don't have the ability to have a partner already, like the Air Force, like you have, that's willing to go even further than where they are today. And we're talking with Gerard Eldering, who's the CEO of Perfusion Medical in Reston, Virginia. Let's talk a little bit about being in Reston, Virginia, and trying to grow an emerging life science company there as well as in the BioHealth Capital Region. Talk about some of the benefits of being here in order to accomplish your goals.
First, I want to clarify, our initial funding came from Defense Health Agency, essentially Army, so we want to give due credit to them. Although I'm an Air Force veteran, so,
You're allowed to give accolades to both, Gerard.
Absolutely, yeah, both go well. So the Capital Region is a great resource. I've been in this region for, I think, spent 30 years since I got out of the Air Force and in this entrepreneurial role a long time. One of the benefits is that in the Capital Region, we easily access the talent and knowledge on the Maryland side of the river, the University of Maryland system, Johns Hopkins, Baltimore. I've spent plenty of time up there. I have great relationships with that side. And then down in Virginia Commonwealth University, relationships with UVA, George Mason. So you've got this combined academic ecosystem mixing the two together. Then there's enough of a legacy of life sciences. So one of our great employees, Jen Butler, who you know very well, Rich, supports your organization as well. Jen has this MedImmune AstraZeneca heritage and experience and brings that to the table. So finding folks like Jen, to come here is so helpful. And furthermore, we've got the federal government here, right? We can literally set up a meeting with somebody from NIH, the military folks, because many of them are in this geographic region. So there's a lot of assets. Now, I will admit there's days I wish we had a higher volume of drug investment, venture capital firms in this region. We have some, but the investment in this region tends to be a little more focused on the software and government joint use type things. But it's still a great place to build a company like ours.
And you've been very successful in non-dilutive funding as well as some of the early stage funding. Talk a little bit about what you have received from the SBIR program, Small Business Innovation Research Grant Program, at NIH. Also, partnerships maybe that you've had, like with Virginia Innovation Partnership Corporation, VIPC, and other people within the region that have believed in the company as well.
It's been a great story for us so far through the first 5 years. The Army and Air Force have put in about $7 million in funding. We received funding from NIH, one phase one STTR as well. We've had both grants from VIPC, Virginia's investment arm, as well as capital investments from that arm as well. We've raised a little under $3 million in total investor funding, including what VIPC has done, which is tremendous. So at this point, we're working on a 3-to-1 ratio of non-dilutive to dilutive funding. I think that'll change. Well, it may change as we go forward. We're working on a $15 million raise right now, which would alter that balance a little bit. But at the same time, the military is absolutely committed. They continue to see the positive data out of this. And in my opinion, validated by comments from military contacts, they also see that Perfusion Medical is a team that is executing, that can move this drug down the pathway to the point where the military can have access to it and it can benefit this huge civilian market as well. So there are a number of discussions going on and efforts being made to bring in more military funding to this as we go along. I know we're going to be successful in raising our A round, $15 million A round, but I think it's very likely that we're going to continue to see an inflow of military dollars as well.
We spend a lot of time helping emerging entrepreneurs like yourself in applying for non-dilutive funding. One of the keys to that is they're willing to continue to work with companies if they achieve their milestones, because they have to report back to the heads at NIH as well as Congress on the success of these projects. I compliment you because you wouldn't have the relationships you have with these non-dilutive funders at NIH or the military if you're not continuing to achieve the milestones in which you said that you were going to produce these new successes as you're growing your technology. So what do you attribute this success to, Gerard?
I want to make a clarification around that, right? And sometimes this caused me to lose a little bit of sleep. We haven't hit all our milestones perfectly, okay? We turned out with analyzing this drug in the blood samples from the animals, it's a very complex scientific activity, and our subcontractor has had a series of delays. I try to be careful about taking credit for hitting all our milestones on time. But the reason I say that is I think for entrepreneurs, other folks involved in the whole entrepreneurial ecosystem, it's important to recognize that sometimes things go awry and sometimes it's not a failure of management, of execution. That's where I see the support continue from the government. So we keep open lines of communication with our various program managers and other stakeholders, our medical advisory board and a military advisory board that we have and so forth. We keep open communications. We share our successes where we are hitting our milestones. And to be clear, the majority of the time we hit them. But when there's a deficiency or a failure, we're upfront about it. And we're walking in with a remediation plan, a plan how to avoid that. Being realistic as an entrepreneur, it's not always perfect, but if you're showing that communication and working to solve those problems. The other piece that you mentioned, which is so important, is having that team, building that team out. And I'll talk to investors, sometimes about the process. I mean, sometimes they'll ask me a really hard regulatory question or a medical or a manufacturing question that I don't have the answer to. And I'm very upfront with them. I say, look, this is a complicated business. There's a dozen different disciplines that have to all come together. I am an expert in perhaps none of them. I'm very, very good at running a company and raising capital and those tasks. But I brought in a team of the individuals with that expertise, folks like Jen Butler, Mark, our regulatory lead, Dr. Frank Booth, our chief medical officer, with tremendous depth. And I know how to call on them and to bring them together and extract that expertise. And that part is, I think, obvious. Everybody talks about the team, but executing that well. And Rich, one point I'll make, and I want to be sensitive about this, I talk to faculty members who feel sometimes that they can learn the different things they have to do, right? So I mentioned the pre-IND meeting with the FDA and there's a package that you submit that or the IND. Occasionally, I'll talk to a faculty member and they say, oh, I've got some great grad students, so we're going to write our IND package to submit to the FDA. To me, that's akin to writing a patent application that you're going to submit. Yeah, you can write it and you can transmit it over to them, but you need expertise for those things. So something I've been very cognizant about is asking the question, which of these tasks need to be done by a commercial expert? And really, at the stage of our company, that's a majority of the task. Dr. Mangino, Dr. Liebrick, the great team down at VCU, they're doing great science things and engaged. They're in our calls, providing their science and research knowledge, which is fantastic. But we rely on the people with the commercial expertise.
You've made some very important points there, Gerard. One is communication. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs are afraid to tell partners, investors, when they've had a little downside or they've gone a little backward. And I think open, honest communication is what everybody appreciates. And they're more willing to work with you rather than hiding secrets about what's going on within your company. And secondly, you keep mentioning Jen Butler, and I'm proud that Jen's an entrepreneur in residence with BioHealth Innovation. And I think you met her in our engagement we had when we were doing some work with Virginia Commonwealth's Tech Transfer Office. But, we have a team right now of 33 different EIRs around the United States. And Jen just happens to be local, which is very convenient for you because you can see her in person, which is very important. And I think that also is one of the benefits of being in the BioHealth Capital Region. If you want to have a meeting with the FDA, you get in your car and you're there within a short period of time, or NIH or the military. You've got all the people in your backyard, which is a benefit to you building a company within the BioHealth Capital Region. So I think a couple words that I would say that lead you to where you are today would be patience and persistence. Patience sometimes is difficult for an entrepreneur, but persistence is critical and a necessity. 3 years ago, you pitched at the crab trap competition and came in second. And then this year in 2025, you came in first. So that's a journey of like 3 years and significant improvement, and everybody appreciated it. And, we had some world-class judges that were judging. So this wasn't an easy competition for you to achieve.
And some great competitors, Rich.
To be honest with you, people said we had 5 equal competitors to you, and really one of the toughest competitions we've ever had in the crab trap competition. So congratulations for winning, but it shows that patience and persistence pays off. Talk a little bit about that journey from 3 years ago to actually achieving that goal this year.
It is all about persistence and this routine of constantly saying, okay, what are we not doing as well in our pitch or presentation? What do we not know? We got bedeviled by a question from an investor. Let's go look up the answer to that or go talk to the expert and catalog that and make sure that I learn that. So it's really constantly looking for that opportunity and improvement and that level of persistence. Rich, I'll tell you a quick little side story. One of my fun activities is running because it just releases stress. It's just something I've been doing since the high school days. And I got into a running streak. I'm not continuing it at this moment, but I ran every single day for over 3,500 days.
Yeah, 10 years.
Almost 10 years. Absolutely. Yeah, there's a little organization, a Run Every Day, that I'm a member of. But the reason I say that is I would often reflect back on this entrepreneurial path and think about the running too. And number one, that I need that persistence. During that period, I got up every single day and I ran, but I also need to get up every single day and look at Perfusion Medical and put aside whatever setbacks we've had, difficulties, challenges, and say, okay, I've got to just step in. I've got to go for my run and I've got to figure out how to improve. And I say it's the team. It's us having the conversation. It's me working with Rob and Liz and Jen and Frank and Mark together to say, how do we improve? And I would say to especially a young or aspiring entrepreneur out there, you need to recognize that. You need to see that most likely if you go down the entrepreneurial road, it's going to be a long haul. I've seen a few folks who've exited very quickly and good for them, but that is not the norm. You've got to go in with this perspective that it's a long haul. I've got to just keep getting better and improving. And if I go into a pitch competition, and I'm sure there were some where we submitted and we didn't even get selected to pitch and improve. And then these things happen and you work your way up in success.
With your runner's analogy, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And I used to run before I had to get both knees replaced and now a hip. But they talk about the proverbial 20-mile wall when you're doing a marathon and you hit that 20-mile point and you hit the wall. So as an entrepreneur, you hit the wall many times. And it's a question of how you break through that wall to be successful with you and your team really defines the winners and losers in the entrepreneurial journey. So let's talk lastly about private-public partnerships. You've basically been able to bring together a lot of people from non-governmental organizations, the military, universities, entrepreneurs in residence, experts, private investors to help get you to where you are today. Talk a little bit about the importance of that private-public partnership mentality for entrepreneurs like yourself.
I think one of the benefits of getting engaged in the tech transfer space, and throughout that, I've always had exposure to the federal side. So the Biter Corporation runs federally funded research centers, for example, and I've had ongoing exposure to the SBIR programs and related programs. But that gave me an understanding of how those parts can come together, and very importantly, where the interests align. I think people today might not always appreciate that, but the fact is that the military, NIH, other aspects of the government, they want to support, they want to advance innovation, they want to help patients, they want to solve problems, energy problems, all sorts of problems. And the private sector wants to do that too. The private sector has a motivation for economic returns, investor returns. But in reality, there can be a lot of alignment between those. And I think Perfusion Medical is a almost optimal case where the military has a very urgent, in one of my I-Corps programs, we use the phrase a lot, a pants on fire problem. Military has a pants on fire problem that we solve for them. But that particular problem, the fixing the hemorrhagic shock, has these broad, very large applications for the civilian patient population. And in fact, there's huge overlap between the military trauma and the civilian trauma environments as well. So you see these intersections, these synergies between what the public, what the government side wants and what private side wants. And part of the key is aligning those, is bringing those together, is the communication. I kind of joke with my team sometimes that the thing I do the most of is talk to people, right? I just like to talk and go sit together with people. But I'm talking to the military folks and the ex-military who have influence, and the government folks and the NIH and the private investor side and the pharma industry and all those folks. But by sharing our story and showing the work that's been accomplished by Dr. Mangino and the company since that time, I'm able to identify where that value alignment lies and bring them all together. So somebody could probably think, hey, there's some scenarios where there's no opportunity for public-private partnership. I'm sure you could come up with some examples. I suspect, especially when it comes to the university commercialization space, there is almost always some alignment, and you have to go out and do the work to identify the people and the organizations on both sides of the table that have interest.
I think Perfusion Medical is an example of where they say, we're from the government and we're here to help, where it's actually true, right, Gerard?
It is.
Is there anything that we haven't covered you'd like the listeners to learn about Perfusion Medical or your journey and the future at this point?
One thing that comes to mind is we're very actively in the fundraising stage right now, working on our A round. So we're out there talking to folks, and people will raise questions about the environment, the current environment, political, economic, biotech investments been in a little bit of a lull. There's been a lack of IPOs. There's some signals we're seeing that or hearing about where that might be coming up. We might be on the upslope there. I hope that's the case. But sometimes I get a bit of a sense of anxiety from the investment side, other sides about that. And in fact, I have to deal with that myself sometimes when things are going a little bit difficult. And what I would say is that I remain an eternal optimist. As an entrepreneur, you have to do that. Sometimes the team members they're like, oh God, you got those entrepreneur optimist eyes on this situation right now. But I have to strike a balance of realism and optimism, mix those two together. When I look at this environment, first off, I am optimistic. This is a great country with a tremendous track record. Organizations like NIH and the military and the private investors that we work with are working towards great goals and objectives. We've accomplished so much, even in just my lifetime here. So I am optimistic. There are challenges. I think we're going to overcome those. And when we look at the ups and downs of the biotech environment, the fundraising, the IPO environments, they come and go. When folks like us have been around for a while, and not suggesting either of us are old in any sense, but we've seen a series of those ups and downs of economic upturns and downturns, and sometimes they affect one sector more than the other. So I remain optimistic, and I think our company is well positioned to create a success through partnership engagement with large pharma. I personally think that probability of that occurring is sooner than later, at least in the terms of the lifespan of a drug company.
I tend to agree, and I've had a number of conversations with investors as well. And one of the things people need to recognize about the BioHealth Capital Region is you have people that can actually do more with less money over time, be able to attract quality people right in your backyard, have a region that has unbelievable assets that cannot be duplicated anyplace else in the world, and you can have reasonable valuations for companies in this backyard. So I think, Gerard, you are on the cusp. You're at a point where you've achieved a significant amount, but there's a long journey ahead of you. But you would be a very reasonable look for someone who is looking to look at a rather midterm investment, because we know companies of your stage are going to find strategic partners as they continue to go down the road. So I would say take a look at Perfusion Medical. If people wanted to get in contact with you, Gerard Eldering, the CEO of Perfusion Medical, Gerard, how would they get a hold of you?
They can go through our contact form on the webpage, but they're welcome to just email me, Gerard at Perfusion Medical. Straightforward, and we'd love to talk to accredited investors about the opportunity.
Well, thank you for being on BioTalk today. We would like to have you come back again and talk about some of the future milestones once those are achieved. And best of luck to you, Gerard.
Thank you, Rich, and thanks for all that you and your organization does.
Thanks for listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis.